Welcome to The Thing About Witch Hunts. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
This is Sarah Jack. Today, you get to hear from Sara Lent Frier, the Assistant Curator of Print and Drawings at the Cantor Arts Center at Stanford University. You may think of Stanford primarily as a tech hub for Silicon Valley, but Sara's work reminds us that it's also a massive capital for the humanities and interdisciplinary research.
Sara recently curated an exhibition titled Cunning Folk, Witchcraft, Magic, and Occult Knowledge. It's a collection show that pulls incredible artifacts from both the Cantor and Stanford's Green Library, spanning the early modern period of 1500 to 1750.
This discussion with Sara is special, and we're not just talking about 500-year-old woodcuts. She brought in contemporary Californian artists whose work responds directly to that history. We're going to talk about everything from 5-foot-long magic scrolls to an Alice in Wonderland-sized bureau that connects to the Salem witch trials.
Let's get into it. Welcome Sara to the show.
Welcome to the Thing About Witch Hunts podcast, Sara Lent Frier. Please tell us about your expertise and work.
Yeah. So my expertise in work, I am the Burton and Dee Dee McMurtry Assistant Curator of Prints and Drawings at the Cantor Arts Center at Stanford University. That means I oversee the entire collection of prints and drawings, which range from early prints from the late 15th century on into the contemporary period, which are also geographic and international in scope. Those include Europe, Asia, Latin America, and it's part of a broader encyclopedic collection that we hold at the Cantor. And I'm also the Assistant Curator of Academic Engagement, which means I am responsible for teaching with collections with our incredible student body at Stanford that can cover classes from art history all the way to urban studies or even medicine and even urban design. So whenever any faculty want to come and work with our collections to teach students, one of the people that specializes in doing that. To do that, I draw on my own kind of field expertise, which is in early modern Northern European prints and drawings, primarily within the German-speaking lands, but also covering the general region of Northern Europe.
Great. Thank you so much. What would you like us to know about Stanford University?
Stanford is internationally known for being such a great institution. I think people generally think about Stanford as a tech school for its contributions to Silicon Valley, for computer science and the like. But it's also an amazing kind of capital for the study of the humanities, of the arts and humanities. And something that I find really special about that is that you don't see as much kind of division between those worlds as you would think. A lot of people who come there to study computer science also bring with them a love for the arts and for different kinds of creative practices. And you just get people who are so smart and so driven to work in an interdisciplinary way and to think across different fields of study and research. It's quite a privilege to be there.
That's wonderful. So the Cantor Arts Center, it sounds like it's like the heartbeat of engagement. Tell us about how that's a platform for looking at history and engaging the academics, as you mentioned.
Absolutely. The Cantor Arts Center is a really special place, and it is, along with its kind of sister museum next door, the Anderson Collection. This kind of museum complex really is the beating heart and soul of visual arts at Stanford. It's a really interesting, has an interesting history. It's one of the older museums in the country. It was actually founded in 1894 by Mrs. Jane Stanford herself in memory of her recently departed son, Leland, for whom Stanford University itself was also founded. But it was a kind of separate and related project of hers because Leland Jr. had such an interest in the collecting of arts and archaeological artifacts himself. So it's this kind of incredible node within the wider history of the school. And it's been around for a really long time. It has a very kind of rich and interesting past. It's a broad collection. It includes over 44,000 objects, also kind of encyclopedic in scope, roughly encyclopedic in scope. And the prints and drawings collection which I run, is about 15,000 incredible items.
It's a lot of items.
Yeah, it's a lot of items, and we do all kinds of really diverse things with them. Our exhibitions range from really cutting edge kind of contemporary shows of living artists, both local to the Bay Area region, but also international artists, as well as shows that are historical, like mine, shows which can be about traditional painting and sculpture, but also which can be as wide ranging as new media with VR goggles, or an incredible show we have coming up of beautiful like indigenous sculpture. So we have all kinds of amazing craft that we showcase as well, and just very rich programming, public programming that also goes along with it. If you are listening from the area, definitely check us out. We have lots of great events that happen year round.
So I came across an article recently that talked about this really big turnout that happened at a presentation about the exposition Cunning Folk, and that is yours. And I would love to hear about the background, why you created it, and a little bit about it. And we'll talk more about what was in it. But
Yeah. Cool. Thank you for asking. So the Cunning Folk exhibition, its full title is Cunning Folk, Witchcraft, Magic, and Occult Knowledge. And it was my first kind of project in the early modern area in my own arena at the museum. And the directive was to produce what's known as a collection show. So you can have different kinds of shows within museums. You can have major loan shows where a lot of the pieces are borrowed internationally. You can have traveling shows where another museum plans the show and it comes all the way prepackaged to your museum. And you can have collection shows that are really meant to showcase what you have. And this was the latter one of those. So the directive was to really see if we could approach this theme through what we had on campus, both in the Cantor's collection, but also super important for someone in my arena, using the amazing collections of Stanford special collections in the Green Library. So the library is also a major research library. They have incredible special collections of bound materials. The old books, the kind of rare books, those are held over there. They're not held within our museum. And so that kind of opens up a whole other arena of amazing artifacts relevant to the subject. I started digging there as well. And the subject is near and dear to my heart. It's a kind of a subsidiary part of my own area of research, which pertains to the study of non-normative bodies within the early modern period. And this was a kind of one facet of my doctoral research. Of course, this maps on very directly to that area. We think about witchcraft, the transformation of the body, about even like the representation of age or of disease, but also the portrayal of witchcraft persecution, which is also unfortunately a huge part of that field. So that's how I came to studying this, and what made me want to pursue it within a curatorial context. Was also something that I knew from working on it in the past is just incredibly evergreen. It's a subject that speaks to many, many different types of people, whether it's artists, working artists today, people who have an interest in the history of the past, the history of science. Of course, occult practices are one of the major legacies at the roots of early modern scientific study. So that's kind of what made me start thinking about it. And I essentially took to the collections and started rifling through from there. And what came out of it was a show. Cunning Folk really considers not just witchcraft, but magical practice, practitioners, and their persecution within early modern European artwork and material culture. And when I say early modern, I'm really referring to the period in Europe that spans from around 1500 to 1750. So when I say early modern, that's really what I'm speaking about. And the title is, of course, very particular. People who are interested in this history might hear the word cunning folk and think, oh, that's a very particular type of magical practitioner. That's the kind of wise person who knew traditional spells, remedies that were benevolent, meant to kind of cure and protect. And this is something that is different from what has mostly filtered down to us in the pop culture, which is that kind of like malevolent or diabolic witch who is practicing, the mythological figure who's practicing in under the kind of auspices, under the control of the Christian devil. So very distinct stories and figures, but figures which also are certainly circling around each other within the wider understanding of magical practice within the early modern period, especially against the backdrop of rising anxieties that will eventually lead to the early modern witch hunts. And I found that a lot of these kind of can overlap or meet, or these ideas are often ensconced within this wider history of print culture, publication culture, because of course, in this early modern moment, we have the rise of the printing press. Artists are starting to make prints. They're starting to engage with subjects by way of printmaking and through a lot of the literature that's also circulating around at the same time. So these figures, these narratives, these iconographies are proliferating faster and further and farther than ever before, thanks to print. And for that reason, it felt appropriate to be able to encapsulate the subject within a kind of broad collection show. A show, I want to be clear, which is not specific to one very particular geographic point or a religious confession or a European kind of cultural geographical location. It's a pretty broad one. And many people who study early modern witchcraft rightfully are very committed to the micro historical aspect of this, of the kind of historical specificity for each of these stories. And I do want to certainly nod to that. This is not a show that drills down with that level of specificity. It's meant to showcase this kind of broader artistic theme within what we have at Stanford. But to that point, I would say, since I wanted to think about the kind of reverberations of these figures through print, it also just occurred to me that the mobility of this magical figure that not just like flies through the air, but also travels through time and space on the printed page is something that's really kept alive in the practice of contemporary artists today. So the mobility of that figure felt really important to treat by reflecting it within contemporary art. And it's for that reason that I chose to make this a lightly cross-temporal show. It was really crucial to me to choose artists. I chose 3 artists, all of whom are women and non-binary artists from California, who are not just working on the subject of witchcraft or magic, but whose work responds directly to the early modern art history of magic and witchcraft. So whether that's through materials, through iconographies, through different types of the invocation of certain forms or stories or media, that's really why it was important for me to set up those conversations. And that's what I did. So happy to speak more about that. The works were arranged in kind of roughly a circular fashion. I like to think of it as a kind of magic circle to kind of think about the kind of connection across and around time in that way.
What were some of the objects you were able to work with that were very special to you?
Yeah. Oh, there were just so many. I guess I'll name like 1 or 2 of the early modern ones and then 1 or 2 of the contemporary ones. I guess for me, for the early modern ones, it was just first really special to be able to include a print that's near and dear to my heart, which is the Alsatian printmaker Hans Baldwin Green's preparation for the Witches' Sabbath, a chiaroscuro woodcut that features a group of women who are preparing a kind of demonic ritual meal. They're clustered around a cauldron. They're working with phallic foods like sausages, deep in a kind of forest night. They're riding on goats. They're creating this kind of meal, which would have been easily legible as a kind of parodic inversion of the Catholic Mass. So where there's a belief of a priest performing the Mass to transubstantiate the wine and the body and blood of Christ for a believing public, have this group of women. Of course, this is a very gendered topic in this time. Books like Malleus Maleficarum and other texts are often very focused, not always, but often very focused on the danger of women being particularly susceptible to the call to diabolic witchcraft. And they're creating this meal, which again becomes another kind of dark mirror for the type of meal that happens in a church. It's a chiaroscuro print, so beautiful lights and darks, which are made by printing different blocks on top of each other. Virtuosic, just beautiful show of skill that he chose, I think, probably to differentiate himself from his famous teacher, Albrecht Dürer, the great Nuremberg printmaker who had also done some witchcraft prints of his own. And we do have one of those in the show as well. So that's one of them. A couple of other favorites from the library near and dear to my heart is a magic scroll. It's a long scroll. I think it's about over 5 feet long, maybe like 4 or 5 inches wide. And it's made of paper. And it's decorated with red and black manuscript writing on 2 sides. It's from around 1790 from the Tyrol region, which is around southern Germany, Austria, that kind of like border region. And it's this amazing script that contains small illustrations that are meant as a kind of apotropaic device, a protective device used to shield the body from misfortune or even from malevolent magic or other negative events from happening. And it would be used as an amulet. So even though it's super long, it's usually rolled into a tiny kind of cylindrical scroll that's about this big. But we had the incredible opportunity to display it fully unrolled in a long case, which is rare and wonderful. And you could see all of the incredible black and white manuscript writing, as well as these beautiful small illustrations, including occult kind of sigils and symbols. A Sator square was included, different kind of sigils that maybe looked related to Solomonic sigils, but not 100% sure. And just some beautiful text, some of them in the first person, which invoked protection against dangers such as being shot with arrows. So they even speak like, oh, shot, calling out to the shots not to harm the wearer. So that was really beautiful. And we were really inspired by it. We actually also had a group of musicians, 3 musicians, led by the artist Leslie Lancaster Allison, who came together and actually put the words to music, set them into a kind of like experimentally harmonic arrangement. And they performed those with harp accompaniment during one of our public programs. And that was like just really incredible. So that's something I was really excited about. And you can actually see that performance on YouTube still. And I believe they will also be releasing a recording of it along with some of the other songs that they performed, all of which related to different artworks in the show. And this was also a performance that was held along with an amazing performance by the great poet Ariana Rines. So it's just great. So that was another thing that was really wonderful. And we got to do a lot of original research on it. And then, of course, like the contemporary pieces were just so fascinating. So there were 3. There was a beautiful print by the Los Angeles artist Candice Lynn featuring Sycorax, which is the mother of Caliban from William Shakespeare's The Tempest. Sycorax in that story is a witch exiled to an island where she gives birth to Caliban, who is then subjugated by another duke, kind of unfolds this entire story. And she gives form to Sycorax as this botanical kind of mistress. She's nude. She's holding all of these different actual dried plants that are pasted upon what is an etching. The work, I should say, is an etching of this figure, holding all of these different dried plants that are all abortifacient plants. They're meant as forms of early modern birth control. So that's an amazing print. We also had a sculpture by the artist Isabel Albuquerque, another Los Angeles artist very near and dear to my heart, number 9 from her 10-part series, Orgy for 10 People in One Body. And this was piece number 9 called The Witch. In this series, each of these sculptures are made as self-portraits of her own body, mostly featured headless, a different kind of avatar of a certain kind of embodied experience or figure or form from art history through different materials and poses that she deeply researches. And in this one, she's posed, it's called Witch because she's straddling a broomstick cast in bronze, a bronze which has just a beautiful green gold patina that was made by stripping the bronze down with this kind of alchemical substance, a kind of violent stripping of the surface, which yielded this beautiful luminosity, some of it which was mixed with ash from a home lost in California fires. So a story of loss and but also of kind of taking flight. And I put it next to that Hans Baldwin green woodcut because that kind of interplay of light and shadow, of dark and light, is just fundamental to these various kind of stories of magical practice, again, both dark and light magical practice that are encompassed within the show. So that was just such a joy. Isabel is one of my favorite contemporary artists, and I was really honored to be able to include this piece within the exhibition. And then finally, another just incredible piece that was at the center of the entire gallery was a large bureau by the incredible Bay Area sculptor Sonny A. Smith. And Sonny does a lot of work based on their own lineage related to early America, both the American South as well as New England, and is directly descended from somebody who was in Salem during the time of the witch trials. And in the Massachusetts Historical Society to this day sits a small bureau, maybe like a couple feet high, made by the Simons Workshop, that would have been the exact kind of bureau in the homes of the people who were involved in the Salem and persecuted in the Salem witch trials. And it's particularly special because within its records, its archival records, is a story that allegedly, this is later on, this is not during the moment of the witch trials, this is some decades later, but somehow there's this record that he kept saying that a witch had jumped out of one of the drawers of the bureau and made it into potentially a kind of like spectral evidence, the kind of object that would be used to indict or involve somebody within a witch trial to be persecuted for witchcraft. So Sonny visited this piece and decided to remake it by hiring a craftsman who specializes in the exact kind of cabinet making of the Simons Workshop, who has upheld that woodworking tradition and remade the bureau into this kind of larger Alice in Wonderland size. So it's huge. It's maybe like 5 feet across and taller than me, so at least 5 feet high. Turned it into a kind of double-sided portal. So instead of drawers that open, it has doors that open up wide. And it's envisioned as a kind of portal between this present moment and that past, those histories of the past. And so it's a really incredible piece. It makes it into a kind of little room of its own. And we had a really beautiful opportunity to actually activate that piece in a new way. So within the cabinet were additional objects made by Sonny, as well as another artist named Rachel Howe, is also a descendant of one of the victims of the Salem witch trials. And Rachel and Sonny held a kind of private ritual together, and they created objects related to their kind of lineal connections to that past. So we had 2 different sculptures within the sculpture that constituted their different family trees. And then there were these beautiful webs of document tape, twill tape, thin white tape that is, to a historian, we recognize that as the kind of tape that would have bound documents in the early modern period. It's dotted with little circles of red sealing wax, the kind which hold documents together. And that's really important because it is really documents that were the engine of what was essentially a legal proceeding. Witch trials were carried out through these kind of kangaroo courts and it's really this kind of bureaucratic and documentary engine which often moved these along. There's these beautiful webs of the papers and the tapes which were festooned inside the cabinet, as well as some little kind of pockets of red felt, some of which held dust from the original nails from the original cabinet in the Massachusetts Historical Society that I previously mentioned. So it was a really wonderful piece. And the doors were cracked open a little bit, and it was really special to be able to open them up and reveal them for people in certain special occasions. So I could go on. There were so many other amazing pieces, but that's just an example of some of the works in the show. And again, each one of these contemporary works engaged directly with another kind of like early modern artwork or subject. So whether it's the bureaus of Salem, Isabel's piece, which was directly related to Witch Flight, for example, by Goya prints that we had nearby, as well as Candice Lynn Sickerak's piece related to that kind of Shakespearean and botanical practice, herbal practices. It was great to be able to put those in conversation with each other.
I'm so blown away by right now to be in your shoes too. What an incredible experience professionally. And I just think it sounds like having it there with your local artists immersed into this history was really no, where else could that happen? Like you pulled it together. That's pretty amazing.
It was, and it's also just a really special feature of the Cantor, of the museum itself. One thing I should mention, and I please put this on the air, like the Cantor is free to all. And because it's free, it means that we can do projects with a kind of freedom and like intellectual nimbleness that maybe other museums can't necessarily do as easily, not because they don't want to, but because often you have to worry about ticket sales. You have to worry about the different kind of publics and making sure to serve them in whatever way is best for that individual museum. Because we're free, we can think towards a kind of radical accessibility if we want, and to be able to engage with these objects and subjects in really new and creative and risk-taking ways. That's something I really love about the Cantor, and it means that we're also going to be able to entice people from all walks of life to come without a barrier to entry. And that's why it is, of course, on Stanford University campus, which is a little bit of a barrier to entry because it's a little bit off the beaten track. Stanford is deep in Palo Alto, but public transportation right up to the door. And it means that we can do deeply research shows and take design risks and really engage creatively in ways that I value deeply in the experience that I have.
Yeah, I'm so glad you had that freedom. It sounds really amazing what you were able to put together with the music and all of the arts coming together at once for this presentation, this exhibition. So, yeah.
Yeah. We also had a sound installation in the exhibition as well. That same artist who I mentioned performed the Magic Scroll. They also sung witch ballads, which we had playing within the gallery at different times. Abruptly, it was kind of meant to like spook you. But that's because it felt very important also to honor the oral tradition. Prints are the widest traveling media within the early modern context, but that doesn't mean that everybody had access to those, couldn't necessarily read things that were written on the print. But the oral tradition was ubiquitous. So we had facsimiles of witch ballads, which were cheap woodcut prints. These were in English that would be easily distributed and able to be sung aloud within a public space. It said the tune, which you could sing the words to. They were very set verses, and they told different narratives of kind of current events related to these histories, often culminating in different witch trials. Both of them told different stories of both of them, in this case, women who ended up being, executed during a witch trial in very long form. These are very long songs. Leslie, who themselves happens to be kind of an expert on witch ballads and has done work within this arena as well. Leslie was able to sing these tunes, and we played different verses of them, as I said, at different points throughout the gallery. So they would catch you the way they might also catch you within a public space in the moment that they were created.
Wow. How did you have the attendees engaged back? Would it be just comment cards, or was there any opportunities for them? Or how did you get feedback live? How did that work?
Yes, we didn't have comment cards. We always have comment cards available at the museum, but we did a lot of public engagement. The tours were so successful that we added a number more of them, and they were pretty much sold out every time. So we had a lot of different opportunities for free tours. Those had Q&As at the end. Another way that I don't know if this is related to feedback, but we did digitize the exhibition. So it's possible to experience it digitally through a kind of virtual tour. It was photographed in 3D. So there's still access to that today on the Cantor site if anyone's interested. But yeah, in terms of engagement, I would say mostly through the tours. And I was in gallery almost every day talking to people. It was in our kind of central prints and drawings gallery. Also happens to be the crossroads of the whole upper floor of the museum. There wasn't a day that I wasn't walking through like multiple times a day. And I often like to stop and watch and see how people engaged with the different works, answer questions. Yeah. I received also emails. I answered a lot of questions via email, but people were very engaged. One amazing moment that occurred in terms of engagement, I did a tour and somebody came, it turned out to be a professor from another local institution who had brought her graduate student who was working on Armenian, I believe it was Armenian lace making. And she came and she was talking about its lace making and its kind of relationship to some of these stories and traditions. And then she pulled a piece of the lace out of her bag and showed it to me. And that was amazing. It was really incredible to meet those people and ultimately ended up giving a talk about the show at that school. And yeah, so we had a lot of repeat guests. And there was, I would say there was quite a lot of campus engagement. Another way that we had engagement, not necessarily with the public, but since we are a university museum, was with students and faculty. So there were lots and lots of classes that came through, and I taught and I gave tours or taught classes through those works to a number of different classes from across the humanities.
It feels like the message and the delivery and the representation and all of that kind of made stigma take a backseat. Like it seems like what I'm hearing is that the knowledge was front and center in this messaging. I think that's a powerful opportunity. I'm not sure that there's a lot of opportunity when witchcraft themes and women are brought together in such an amazing demonstration.
Yeah, no, thank you for mentioning that. Yes, I would be clear that the show did have a section about witch trials, like a small one. It's not a huge show. It's a single gallery show. Prints and drawing shows are typically like pretty small because the objects we're working with are itty bitty. So this was not like a gigantic show, but it did have a section about witch trials. But yeah, to your point, that was definitely not like the specific focus of the show. The show was really about what is cunning, the way that cunning is embodied magically within the graphic arts of this time. And I do want to be clear, like cunning people who were very real people certainly were often stigmatized at many points within this history. I certainly don't want to like elide or make light of that. That certainly is something that happened. And that is one story, just like the witch trials of the Salem witch trials is another story. You have, for example, like stories of cunning people who are kind of sideline. We have objects that show they're kind of more sidelining by the rise of like early modern medical institutions. But at the same time, you had different kinds of practitioners and occult practitioners, things like that, who also were like reading the same herbals and using the same books. So these things are not as like black and white and cut and dry and separated as they might seem. And I wanted this show to just be like a very accessible, kind of multifaceted on-ramp for people to encounter kind of more broadly, whatever their interest is. Yeah, there were even objects. We had this amazing painting that's part of our permanent collection called The Sorceress. And it's actually related to classical sorcery, which is like a totally different kind of magical person, in this case, magical woman. And and you can see this in our permanent collections to this day. She's reading this magical text called a grimoire, and she has her wand in another hand, and she's touching it to different animals, possibly transforming humans into animals. And in the background are all of these incredible instruments of early modern natural philosophy. So little beakers and lamps, an armillary sphere, things that look like they could be used for alchemy, a compass. So she's really shown as she's certainly practicing magic, but there's a kind of ambivalence to whether that kind of cunning, that knowledge is good. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's just powerful. And it's an amazing like fulcrum for these different embodiments of magical practice that the show is about. So yeah, I would say there's just so many different stories that are held within this subject. It really wasn't about just one of those threads.
I find it interesting that, speaking of different types of magical practitioners, there were the cunning folk. They were usually working class people who were finding lost objects, helping to heal neighbors, that sort of thing. And they did a lot of the same stuff, though, that the learned elite alchemists and astrologers did. So they were even doing astrology and stuff, some of the cunning folk, but they're considered down here, and this knowledge is untouchable. It's not bad.
I mean, it's a stratified class society for sure. And it was really important to me to, as I mentioned, even with the sound thing, to capture different objects from different strata of those societies. So, for example, I actually did have a Bartman jug, a early stoneware jug, the kind that has a little human face on it. That's the kind that's often recognized in conjunction with witch bottles. So vessels that would hold kind of magical materials and be put in the walls or the floor to protect a home or a person within that home. And that's one aspect of cunning practice for sure. So we had that in there as well. And meanwhile, we had a really super fancy herbal that probably was really expensive and was only held by the most wealthy person. So definitely this certainly does stratify within different parts of those early modern cultures, but also it's amazing that those forms of knowledge do pass among and between them. And there's different ways of engaging those through the objects that we selected. We also did have a print of actual early modern occult, like iconic occult figures who would have been these men who were loomed large within this imagination. So those things were right next to each other within the show on purpose to kind of show that those different areas are happening concurrently and certainly in conversation with one another. And that knowledge is, of course, being transmitted through that mobile medium of print and publishing. That's that mobility that I'm speaking to. And the oral tradition, of course, which we have no record of anymore. And a lot of that kind of is lost. This is the way that I sought to preserve that aspect of history.
How did children or babies or the relationship of the community magic and youth, did it show up in your story?
Children or babies? No, in this story it didn't. I would say that the domestic sphere and like motherhood did in some ways, very gently. For example, I mean, it actually plays into questions writ large, of course. Like a lot of these subjects and questions are just about gender. But more specifically, there was a print of a witch's kitchen where a kind of older woman is huddling with a younger one, looking at a grimoire while there's these preparations for a Sabbath and these demons are lighting their darkened kitchen with a torch. It's after a very well-known painting or series of paintings, versions of this theme by the Flemish artist David Teniers the Younger. This is a later etching after that painting. And you can really see them huddled in this kind of intimate, like domestic space, this kitchen space, which for me really was about this kind of new family that's formed around this witch and her younger acolyte. And these little demons almost look like children, like jumping around. Meanwhile, they're like sending another one of their friends who's like nude on a broomstick up the chimney to go to the witch's Sabbath. So it's almost this kind of like inversion of that domestic sphere that I was talking about. And of course, that was certainly a fear that was in play around female witches. They know that they were inversions of mothers. They tended to their animal familiars like babies, put them in cribs or fed them or suckled them instead of actually like doing their Christian duty of being a mother. That's definitely lurking in the background of all this. So in that sense, I would say it was part of the show, but children, themselves. Not in this one. No, not in this case. What makes you think of, I'm curious, what makes you think of the children aspect?
I was just thinking about just another layer of fears around magical behavior and the harm of children.
Oh, the harm of children, certainly. Yes. Oh, in that case, yes, that was in the show. We had the famous print Lo Stregozzo, which features a kind of hag witch on this beautiful curling bone carcass being dragged through a swamp by actually like nude men. It's an Italian 16th century print. And we had a later reprinting of that. And this witch is actually a direct citation of that artist Albrecht Dürer, who I referred to earlier. She's pictured on this skeleton and her hair is flying behind her. And she has this bucket with little babies in it. And she's reaching into the bucket because it was said that babies were an essential ingredient for the unguent that rubbed on your body could help you to fly as a witch. Of course, this is all untrue, but yes, that fear is certainly represented within that print as well. And a lot of these scenes within the Sabbath section of my show did, like I mentioned, feature that preparation of meals, of like meal making. And within that are also references to cannibalistic acts against children and dark things like that.
Of our time, but was there anything else that you wanted to cover today?
Had some really amazing collaborators. The designer of the show, Albert Lewis, did such an incredible job. And it was just really a group effort. I'm just very grateful to all my colleagues who helped to make it happen and who all helped turn over lots of these shows all at the same time, twice a year. Definitely, I want to stress, if you can, if you're anywhere in San Francisco, you can easily come to the Cantor on the Caltrain or by Uber. There's easy parking. The museum is free, and we have just amazing shows that are totally on the level of anything you would see in the city. So if you have enough time, come down to the Cantor Arts Center. The United States is very contemporary art heavy, and that's wonderful. I love contemporary art. It's within the show, but it's also such a privilege to be able to invite people to also engage with the alterity of the past, with kind of worlds that are outside of themselves and the moment that we live in. And I think also while we find we see ourselves reflected in the art of the present, I think sometimes there's just amazing opportunities to see how that manifests within like the art of a distant time and place, and to see where those parallels and also those differences can be formative and engaging and inspiring and anxiety inducing and can just be really generative. It's just really important for me to be able to continue to kind of tell those bygone stories with older objects and to try to keep those alive within the eyes and the minds of our visitors and to put them where they are in telling those stories. So it was another reason why I love this subject also, because as I mentioned, it just engages so many different people on so many different levels and provides these really important like nodes of connection and engagement, again, with this distant time and art.
It's so striking to think about that mobility that Sara mentioned, how these magical figures didn't just fly through the air in myths, but traveled across time and space on the printed page and through oral tradition.
And the fact that the Cantor Arts Center is free to the public is such a win for accessibility. If you're anywhere near the Bay Area, this is a must visit. The Cantor Arts Center, both their ongoing work and their special exhibitions are worth checking out very much. For free, you can't beat that price.
A huge thank you to Sara Lent Frier for sharing her expertise with us. If you want to see the exhibit yourself, it has been digitized in 3D on the Cantor website, and you can find recordings of the witch ballads that she talked about that were performed during their public programs, all on YouTube.
It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just something that happened back then. It's something we're still actively shaping and reflecting on through our creative practices. and we can interact with it now.
Thanks for listening to the Thing About Witch Hunts podcast. We'll see you next time. Please share this episode with friends you know would love it.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.